Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's A Perfect Episode number 5, The Showstopper, Bojack Horseman. This video is a part of a series of videos where I analyze, examine, and dissect episodes from some of my favorite shows. Episodes that I believe to be near perfect and worth recognition and a deeper dive. This series comes in no particular order and are not necessarily my 10 favorite episodes of all time, but are episodes I particularly find noteworthy. In this video, I will explore episode 11 of season 5 of Bojack Horseman, an episode called The Showstopper. Now, Bojack Horseman is the only comedy show that you'll find on my A Perfect Episode list, and it's a show I've referred to before as my favorite animated comedy of all time. And it's mainly because of its dramatic and artistic elements. There are elements of comedy in this episode, as parts of it are quite funny, which adds to why I like this episode so much, but ultimately I think it's brilliant for the character story and the artistic way in which it is told. So I've done a top 10 favorite episode list for Bojack Horseman before, and this episode was actually number 2 on that list. But I mentioned in that video that I considered my top 3 to really be a 3-way tie. The other 2 episodes in my top 3 were That's Too Much Man, which was my number 1, and The View from Halfway Down, which was my number 3. So when it came down to it and I had to pick a favorite out of the 3, I went with That's Too Much Man because it has a perfect blend of dramatic character story and comedy, and it's probably the funniest out of the 3, and it has one of the most saddest and tear-jerky endings that had me streaming in tears every time I watch it. However, I decided not to do that episode for this Perfect Episode series, as it's more straightforward than the other 2 episodes in my top 3, as the other 2 are more interpretive and metaphorical, and therefore would be more interesting for me to analyze. So it was then between The Showstopper and The View from Halfway Down, and I nearly went with A View from Halfway Down, as it's probably the more interpretive and metaphorical episode out of the 2, and one could spend hours picking through all the different ways to interpret that episode and its hidden meanings. But ultimately I decided against it because even though I still love that episode, I do feel it is undercut by the death fake out that happens immediately at the start of the next episode, and I do feel this episode would have been better and more powerful had Bojack actually died, which in fact is why I placed it behind The Showstopper in my top 3. So I decided to go with The Showstopper instead. So why do I love The Showstopper so much? Most people, when picking a favorite episode from Season 5 of Bojack Horseman, would pick the episode that consists of one big monologue, free churro. And although I do appreciate that episode, I feel it's mostly overrated and not the masterpiece everyone else makes it out to be. And I personally feel The Showstopper is a masterpiece and the accumulation of Bojack's character story up to this point. In an interview, showrunner Raphael Bob Waxberg said that the idea from Season 5 came out of how at the end of Season 3 audiences were so upset with Bojack and felt that he sunk to a new low and didn't know if they could stick with him anymore. And then at the end of Season 4, things were looking good for Bojack, and he truly seemed happy and a better person, and the audience seemed very happy for him. But Waxberg argued that he wasn't a better person, that he was still the same Bojack from Season 3, making the same mistakes, and that the only way Bojack could truly grow is if that he had to hit rock bottom. And that's what this episode is. Bojack hitting rock bottom. Now, arguably, he hits a rockier bottom in Season 6, which leads up to the other episode I considered A View from Halfway Down, but I already mentioned why I chose this episode over that one. And of course, another reason why I love this episode so much is the reality-bending nature of it. The way it puts you in Bojack's mindset as he becomes untethered from reality, and I believe this episode does one of the best jobs I've ever seen of portraying that on screen. Now, I did find personally that out of all the episodes I covered in my A Perfect Episode series so far, this is the one most dependent on context. As when I first watched this episode out of context, I wasn't as blown away by it. It wasn't until I reminded myself of the surrounding context and everything that got this character up to this point, and then I am truly able to find this episode a masterpiece. And I'm not saying that as a negative at all. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. In fact, I think it's quite a brilliant use of long-term storytelling technique. Something that's really difficult to pull off, and a lot of shows can't do it very well. So, you will catch me referencing previous events in the series a lot in this video. So let's go ahead and jump into the episode. So the episode begins with the previous on segment for the show Filbert. Now, Filbert is the show that Bojack Horseman has been starring in all season. Previously, we had only seen part of Filbert, as Bojack has been filming it, and we never focused on the events of the show itself. However, the segment explains that Filbert is a detective who is in a relationship with Sassy. Sassy is played by Gina, who Bojack is in a relationship with. Anyway, Filbert and Sassy are investigating a serial killer where Filbert's dark past is explored, where apparently Filbert's wife was killed by his partner Fritz. Fritz is played by Mr. Peanut Butter's Bojack's real-life friend. Anyway, Filbert confessed to Sassy that he killed Fritz after Fritz killed his wife. And now apparently Fritz is haunting him as a ghost or something. Now, Bojack Season 5 as continually used the show Filbert to draw parallels to Bojack's own life, as the set of Filbert's house looks exactly like Bojack's house, and Filbert is seen as a problematic character in the same way Bojack is. In fact, since this is the episode that focuses most on Filbert, it's of course the one that draws the biggest parallels between the two characters. So next we get the opening sequence, which is unique to this episode because rather than being the typical Bojack Horseman theme we get at the start of every episode, it's the opening to Filbert, which I love when the show does creative things with its opening sequence. Anyway, the opening sequence is a riff off of modern day cop shows, frankly shows I don't watch, like True Detective, Justified, and other shows I haven't even heard of or would barely recognize, as that's the show Filbert is intending to satirize. In fact, Waxberg refused to pin down any one show as being what Filbert was satirizing, but instead said it was taking aim at shows that featured an unchecked anti-hero, one who is portrayed as cool or somehow the protagonist of the show. And Waxberg was saying that such characters shouldn't be glamorized and instead portrayed as tragic figures that they are. However, the show obviously mocks shows like that, as the dialogue in the show is a bit ridiculous and the situations are unrealistic, such as in the finale of Filbert, nuclear bombs were exploding all over the city for no reason, as it had nothing to do with the plot. And at the start of the next season, everything's fine again like it never happened. Now, this is an exaggerated version of what shows do, but exaggerate is what satires do. I find it effectively mocks shows that put a shocking ending at the end of their season and then promptly ignores or resolves it way too easily. I can think of many shows that do that. Also, about the opening sequence specifically, which zooms around a stereotypical murder board with lots of notes and pictures of possible suspects pinned to the board. I love that there's a note pinned to the board that reads, "Buy more push pins." I find that really funny. So then we get the opening scene of the new season of Filbert, where Filbert is looking over the destroyed landscape of LA when Sassy arrives to bring him some soft-serve yogurt. Through the sequence, we hear Filbert's internal monologue via voiceover explaining the situation, and he thinks about how Sassy hasn't reacted negatively to his confession that he had killed his partner. This also establishes the voiceover technique, which is typical in the detective noir genre, but will also be used in the Bojack sequences throughout this episode, as the episode is able to blend the two. The scene then cuts, and the show's showrunner, Phil McVicker, come out and he yells at Bojack for eating the prop food. We then cut to Bojack and Gina driving on a nice road on a sunny day, where we see posters for the show Filbert and an upbeat happy music is playing. We get Bojack's inner monologue narration this time that explains it's been 2 months since the premiere of season 1 of Filbert, which was a hit, and how it's been great for him but even better for Gina, which establishes that Bojack cares for Gina and cares about her happiness. This is an important aspect that's something important to bear in mind. Also, this clearly establishes a 2-month time jump from the previous episode, which did take place during the premiere of Filbert. So this is also important, as it established there's been 2 months in which Bojack hasn't spoken to his best friend Diane, whom he had a falling out with in the previous episode. And also, it's been 2 months of Bojack's opioid addiction progressing and getting worse, as well as 2 months of Bojack living the high life after the success of his show. This is illustrated in this scene as we see people crowding around Bojack and Gina as they drive down the street, and paparazzi taking pictures of them as they are big stars. Gina waves to them as Bojack downs some pills. As soon as he takes the pills, we get a brief flash of Bojack taking pills on the set of Filbert while an ominous sound is heard, but it's only brief as we jump right back to the happy scene of Bojack and Gina in the car. Gina talks about how she's done tons of shows before, but this is the first one that actually made her a star, and in his inner monologue we hear Bojack saying that he's actually really happy for her and not at all jealous or resentful, and I do believe those feelings are truly genuine. But then he says that he always has this itching feeling that something's rancid is always lurking just beyond the horizon. We then get an ominous building noise, this time as we see the image of the Filbert Balloon floating above them. Now, the Filbert Balloon will be a recurring motif in this episode. It was first seen in the previous episode at the premiere of Filbert. It was a giant floating balloon in the shape of Bojack in costume as Filbert. In this episode, its appearances are more metaphorical than literal. It isn't actually there, but a vision Bojack keeps having. What it represents is open to interpretation, as it isn't made objectively clear in this episode. I've heard several interpretations on what it represents. The one I like, that it represents Bojack becoming untethered from reality, just as the balloon became untethered and started floating around aimlessly in the previous episode when Diane knocked it loose when she quit the show Filbert in anger. I have my own interpretation, which I'll get to at the end of this video, but in these ways, the scene gets across the point that things have been happy and picturesque for Bojack and Gina. However, Bojack's addiction is a lurking element of darkness. Next, we jump back into a scene where Filbert, we jump back into a scene of Filbert where the phone rings and Filbert answers. When he hangs up, Sassy asks him why he still has a landline, and in voiceover we hear Filbert considering what he should tell her, if he should just say he's old-fashioned, or that he likes things that are plugged into the wall so he can have something to hold on to in case he starts to float away. Instead, Filbert tells her that it was his wife's landline, and we get a brief flash of Fritz strangling his wife. Now, it's interesting that Filbert mentions wanting to remain grounded to not float away, as this ties into the theme of the floating balloon and Bojack being untethered. Now, granted, it's Filbert and not Bojack, but another recurring theme that the whole season has focused on, and this episode in particular focuses on, is how closely Filbert resembles Bojack and how the two are intertwined. So Filbert tells Sassy that the chief has been murdered and that he's going to get to the bottom of this, this time it's personnel. Flip then calls cut, and Bojack asks Flip if he should say this time it's personal, but Flip insists that it's personnel, as it's one of the personnel of the police station that murdered the chief. Mr. Peanut Butters, who plays Fritz, then asks Flip if it would be scary if he talked in a spooky voice, which Flip instantly dismisses, insisting he said no spooky voice. Now, Mr. Peanut Butters is a nice contrast to Bojack, as Mr. Peanut Butters does not resemble the character he's playing at all, and is made clear in this scene that he barely understands him, which contrasts Bojack nicely, as Bojack and Filbert are so much alike they start to become intertwined. Offset, while Gina's looking over the script, Bojack goes to her and asks her if she noticed anything off about the script, and she replies that without Diane there, Flip's use of the word literally in the script is out of control. And this is a nice setup gag, as in the rest of the episode during the scenes of Filbert, you'll notice they use the word literally a lot. However, Bojack dismisses the remark and says that he means that the script resembles his life, and he also had a male mentor that died, speaking of the Horsing Around creator Herb Kazaz, and says the chief in the script who died, his name is Basil, which is a herb like herb, but Gina dismisses it to say no one would write about him, but Bojack counters that Diane did. This is in reference to an earlier episode where Diane heard that Bojack did something shady in New Mexico with a 17-year-old girl, something that he regrets, but whenever Diane tried to talk to him about it, he deflected, so she wrote the little details that she knew into a script of Filbert, and that put the two of them at odds. However, Gina points out that Diane doesn't write for the show anymore, but Bojack wonders if Flip read her book, and then he vows to get to the bottom of it, as this time it's business. Personal business. And then the same musical cue is played when Filbert said that this time it's personnel, thus drawing a direct comparison to the two and establishing that the two of them are going to launch their own investigations, which interestingly enough have the same conclusion, but I'll get more to that one later. So next we see Bojack enter Flip's office and very obviously try to play a fake friend as he asks Flip where he gets his ideas for the show from, and asks in a not so subtle way if it's based off of anyone's life. Flip gets defensive and says that he comes up with his own ideas and that those popsicle guys signed a release. Bojack is confused about popsicle guys and asks what he's talking about. Flip responds by asking him what he's talking about, and then they both look at each other with suspicion. So, the Popsicle Guys refers to a previous episode where Flip was accused of plagiarizing a joke used in the show from a joke written on a popsicle stick. But as Flip just mentioned, the situation was resolved. So, when Bojack seems to suggest Flip is getting his ideas elsewhere, he immediately jumps to that. But Bojack, of course, is convinced Flip is writing about him. It's a trope I've seen in comedy shows a lot, but it always works for me because it is so true to life, as people are usually so absorbed with their own problems and own worries, they only think about their own worries and project it onto what other people say. Like in this instance, Bojack is going to interrogate what Flip said about popsicle guys. He's going to integrate what he said about popsicle guys into his delusion that someone is out to get him, when Flip is just worried that someone's going to try to accuse him of plagiarism again. It's actually quite brilliant. So next we see Bojack in his trailer pondering over what Flip meant, and he's now more convinced than ever that Flip is up to something, but then Princess Carolyn comes in and asks if he's okay, which he responds with, well, of course he is. What would make her think otherwise? And then she points out that he is in fact not in his trailer, he's in Stingray Reloaded's trailer, when we then see him as he swims by rather angrily. Princess Carolyn then asks if he's sure he's okay and says that it's because he's her friend and she would never forgive herself if something happened to him that would affect their ability to stay on schedule. And she says she cares about him and the 218 other people who would be out of a job if he spirals out of control. So Princess Carolyn is Bojack's friend, but as also is typically his agent, and in this case she's a producer on the show as well. And Bojack does have a history of spiraling out of control on sets and losing jobs. But you can tell Bojack is upset that Princess Carolyn isn't coming to him as a friend and is offended that she's just worried about her own job, so he responds by saying that he's not going to screw up this professional opportunity for her, and then tells her with heavy sarcasm that her concern for him is touching. And then he takes some more pills. Princess Carolyn confronts him about the pills and asks what's in them, but Bojack replies by getting really defensive and brings up the time he hurt his back during a stunt, which is what led to him taking the pain medication in the first place, and blames her for not being there for him that day. And he tells her she's doing a great job making him feel like she gives a shit, and tells her that she's going to be an awesome mom, which you can tell really hits home for her. So Bojack and Princess Carolyn have their own history of having a very codependent and unhealthy relationship. Princess Carolyn mothers him too much, and he had become very dependent on her. And the mother remark refers to her efforts to try to adopt the baby, which is why she wasn't there on set the day of his accident, because she was visiting an expecting mother who might let her adopt her baby. So Bojack may be a bit justified that she's not really looking out after not really looking after him as a friend, but he's being selfish if he feels that she always has to be there to stop him from doing stupid things. Princess Carolyn suggests he take the night off and get some sleep and relax. Bojack realizes that he went too far and apologizes for the mother remark, but Princess Carolyn simply tells him to get some sleep. So, we then see him where Bojack isn't relaxed, as it's 4 in the morning and he's wide awake, still obsessing over how Flip is up to something. Gina, however, is just trying to sleep. Bojack then tells her that Princess Carolyn said that he was not okay and spinning out of control and would make a great mother, comically conflating the conversation that he had with her. Gina's response is to tell him that she doesn't think that he would make the best mom, and Bojack snaps at her that he'd be an excellent mother, to which she only responds by saying, "Wow." Bojack instantly realizes that he's acting a bit crazy, and in his inner monologue he tells himself to act cool. He then calls Gina Daddy-O and says that he's going to Splitsville to the lavatory and tells her to hang 10. Now, this is one of the funnier scenes of the episode, but it also illustrates how Bojack is losing his touch on reality, and he's starting to realize it, but does a bad job of covering it. So in the bathroom, he takes some more pills, and one of his many hiding spots, in this case a bottle of shaving cream that's really a disguise to hide more pills. After he takes the pills, he has a vision of a spotlight in a posh-looking staircase with glowing lights coming from the top. However, when Gina comes in the bathroom, it interrupts his vision, and Bojack scrambles to try to put the shaving cream can away before Gina realizes that it's just a hiding spot for his pills. Gina doesn't notice what he's doing, though, and tells him that his problem is that he's taking the character home with him, and it happened to her before. And she's not entirely wrong, as it's obvious that the suspicious nature of the character of Filbert is starting to influence him, as well as the dark material of the show. However, she doesn't put together his drug addiction, which is what is amplifying this problem. In the morning, we see Bojack drinking coffee in his kitchen, getting ready to work when he sees the same untethered Filbert Balloon floating outside his window. So this troubles him to where he wants to take more pills, so he goes to a banana, which is apparently one of his hiding spots, but that bottle is empty, so he then unroots a cactus to reveal another hiding spot, so it just illustrates how deep his addiction is that he has that many hiding spots. After he takes the pills, he hears old-timey music that's very echoey and quickly fades. This is actually a snippet of the song from the musical number Don't Stop Dancing that we hear at the end of the episode, so it's a nice sort of foreshadowing for that. Anyway, someone slips a note under his door, and it looks like one of those like kidnap type notes that use letters cut out from different magazine covers, and it says, "You did a bad thing, and I'm going to tell." We later learned that this is simply a flyer for his show, and it shows how drugged out he is that he doesn't recognize it, and instead it feeds into his paranoid delusion that someone is out to get him. Because Bojack has done a lot of things in his life that he deeply regrets, and one of the biggest fears is that one of those mistakes is going to come back and haunt him, and he'll pay the price for it, so he's incorporated that into his delusion. We then see him reading the note, and then he quickly hides it from Gina when she approaches. She asks him if the Gazette came, as she thinks there's an article in there about her, but he starts acting weird, telling her that nothing came, and why is she so obsessed with things coming. Then in his inner monologue, he muses that someone is trying to take down the show, which would affect Gina and take away her happiness, and so he has to get to the bottom of this for her, which will be a recurring theme in this delusion, that he convinces himself he's doing this for her, but in the end, the delusion ultimately is what hurts her. Meanwhile, Gina is confused on why Bojack's acting so weird. We then cut to a scene of Filbert where they go to the coroner's office to get clues on the chief's death. Filbert says that the coroner used to be his best friend. We then cut to Bojack pounding on the door of Diane's apartment, someone who used to be Bojack's best friend, as he tells her that he knows that it was her that wrote the note, but she convinces him that it wasn't her, as that she has no interest in writing about him anymore. Then we cut back to Filbert, where they arrive at the coroner's office to find her dead. Sassy makes jokes about it while Filbert sees a vision of Fritz walking by. Now, the parallels between Filbert and Bojack are fascinating. I particularly like that both of them are having visions that are their subconscious trying to tell them that something is wrong with them. Bojack at home tells himself he needs to narrow the list of suspects down to those who would most want to hurt him or expose the terrible thing that he's done, and while he's thinking, he takes some more pills that he has hidden in an award trophy. While looking through his phone, he comes across Charlotte. Now, Charlotte was a friend he had many years ago before he became famous. Several years ago, he reconnected with her to find that she was married and had several kids, including a teenage daughter named Penny. Bojack lived with Charlotte and her family for several months, becoming close with all of them, including her husband, Kyle. Until one night, Bojack made a move on Charlotte, who rejected him and asked him to leave. This was after Penny had tried to sleep with Bojack, but he had rejected her. However, Penny made another move on Bojack, and this time he didn't reject her, and Charlotte walked in on Bojack and Penny together in his bedroom right before anything happened. So Charlotte made it clear to Bojack that he had to leave immediately, and that if he ever tried to contact her or her family again, she would fucking kill him. So when Bojack sees Charlotte's name on his phone, he tells himself repeatedly not to call her, but the next thing you know, he's calling her. Thankfully, though, it's her husband Kyle who picks up the phone, so Bojack puts on a terrible Scottish accent and pretends to be from the cable company taking a survey. At first, he asks questions about cable, but then he starts asking if his wife is out to get a man who used to be her best friend, and also asking how Kyle would rate his daughter's sexual maturity. And the sequence is played for laughs, as Kyle is being completely oblivious and answers the questions honestly, and Bojack slips into his normal accent whenever he starts to get worried. But again, Kyle is oblivious and asks him what channel Netflix is on. But Bojack quickly hangs up as the call would seem to indicate that Charlotte and Penny are not out to get him and have moved on from him. We then get another scene from Filbert, where Filbert and Sassy are investigating the stranglings. There are up to 8 now. They're standing in front of a murder board that has pictures of suspects pinned on it. This then cuts to Bojack staring at his own murder board that has pictures of people on it that he thinks is trying to ruin his life. It's mostly people we've seen on the show before, people Bojack has wronged, so he thinks that they might be out to get him. But it also shows how Bojack still feels guilty for having wronged these people. But also on this board are sticky notes that say, "Protect Gina and save the show." Bojack has the show's production assistant help him print pictures for the murder board. She tells him that she's not sure that she's supposed to help him make a list of enemies, but he tells her that if she's going to whine like that, she can put her own picture on the board too. Bojack then proclaims that he has to get to set, but the PA tells him that they are in fact on set, and he looks around to see that it's true. This illustrates how disorientated Bojack is and that he's losing his grip on reality. He walks by the sets and again gets another vision of a posh staircase leading up to a bright glowing light. But when the vision abruptly ends, he finds himself standing outside of Flip's office, where he can hear him talking to Princess Carolyn, where he's trying to tell her that he thinks Bojack knows something about the popsicle guys. Flip, of course, is referring to their accusation of plagiarism, but Bojack inserts this into his delusion that someone's out to get him, so he listens intently. Unfortunately, Mr. Peanut Butters then walks by being very loud on the phone, so Bojack can't hear what Flip and Princess Carolyn are saying. He tries to shush him, but it doesn't work. When Mr. Peanut Butters hangs up the phone, he makes a comment on how Bojack is lurking behind closed doors, and Bojack simply makes a statement on how someone is hiding something. Mr. Peanut Butters immediately begins to panic, thinking that Bojack is referring to the fact that Mr. Peanut Butters cheated on his current girlfriend with his ex-wife Diane. And he asks Bojack if he talked to Diane. Bojack says he did, because he did talk to her about his suspicion that someone was after him, but Mr. Peanut Butters took that to mean that she told him about the affair, so he is very upset and says that he couldn't take it if Bojack lost any respect for him over this, and asks if they could just forget about the whole thing. Bojack generally doesn't know what he's talking about and says, "What whole thing?" and Mr. Peanut Butters replies, "Thank you," as he takes that to mean Bojack is willing to drop it. But Bojack is generally confused and is now more suspicious of Mr. Peanut Butters and Diane. So this gets back to the same thing about people always thinking the issue is about them, especially when there's something they feel guilty about or is gnawing at them, as Mr. Peanut Butters feels very guilty for cheating on his girlfriend, so that's how he interprets Bojack's behavior. So we then get what we think is Bojack and Gina lying in bed talking, where Bojack is telling her that something doesn't feel right until Bojack calls her Gina. Then we can hear Flip yelling at Bojack that he called her Gina again, and then we realize they are actually on set filming a scene for Filbert, thus putting the viewer in the mindset of the disorientation that Bojack is feeling, and his real life personality is blending with the fictional character he plays. But Bojack quickly gets back into character and calls her sassy. We then cut to them sleeping when Fritz shows up and shoves a gun in Filbert's face. Fritz tells him that they're not so different. In fact, they are pretty much the same. Filbert tells him that he's not real, so he hits him with the gun and asks if that felt real. Filbert pleads with him that he doesn't have to do this, that he can trust him. Fritz says that he does trust him, but that he doesn't trust her. He then points the gun to Sassy, and Filbert quickly responds by grabbing the receiver of his landline and knocking Fritz around with it. He then remarks that that's why he still has the landline. Fritz then runs away, crashing through the window to leave. So this is foreshadowing that Fritz is actually inside Filbert's head and another one of his personalities, a plot twist of Filbert that will be revealed later on. This, of course, as most things in Filbert, paralyzes Bojack's story, as the floating balloon he keeps seeing that's haunting him is also inside his head and signaling that Bojack is his own worst enemy. Filbert picks up a couple of shards of broken glass and says that the pieces are starting to fit together, literally, and then this hard cuts to Bojack looking at his murder board, continuing that thought that it's all starting to make sense. He puts up a picture of Flip, and in his inner monologue we hear him thinking that Flip has a secret that he won't tell. He then puts up a picture of Princess Carolyn, and he thinks that she keeps checking on him to stop him from finding out the truth. He then puts a picture of Mr. Peanut Butters up and thinks that he's up to something involving Diane. He had put an X over Diane's picture after he had talked to her previously, but now he puts up another picture of Diane over top of that one. He then asks himself what they all have in common, and as he thinks the word common, he puts up a picture of the hip-hop artist Common. A joke that I actually really love, by the way. He then puts up a string that ties the 5 pictures together, which coincidentally forms a P. He then thinks that they are all involved in making the show Filbert. Then aloud he says that the show is just a plot to destroy him and expose his secrets, and that poor Gina is caught in this madness and he has to find a way to protect her. We then see that the production assistant is standing next to him taking notes and repeats back to him that everyone is evil and it's all a conspiracy to destroy him, protect Gina. Bojack then says aloud that the fascinating adventures of Detective Bojack, who is great, will continue after this. This confuses the hell out of the production assistant, who insists that Bojack should get to set. He's then confused and says that he thought they were on set, but she reveals that he's at his house. Bojack, upset with her talking back, then accuses her of trying to take him down, to which she replies she is trying to take him down to set. This really illustrates his drug-induced paranoid delusions are getting out of control, but a couple things are interesting about this. That his delusion is centered on someone trying to expose his secrets and reveal to the world something bad that he did, something that actually does happen in season 6. However, he reveals how the guilt of his past mistakes still haunt him, and it's something he can't get away from. But instead of trying to face them and become a better person, he concocts these paranoid delusions where he is the victim. It's actually really quite fascinating. So, next, we see Bojack arrives to set, where Flip is very upset that he's late and instructs the crew to set it up. Gina is there and asks Bojack what's going on with him. It cuts to a narration where he says that it's better for her if she not know. However, Gina points out that he just said that out loud. Bojack dismisses it and says that it must be all the night shoots, and then it cuts to him giving further narration where he says that it's hard to lie to her. But Gina points out again that he also said that out loud, and then she asks him if he knows that this is real. And he replies that it's more real than she knows, dollface. Then it cuts to narration again where he says, "Face! Clocks have faces." Then he exclaims, "That's it!" and then runs off set. So this scene, while comical, also illustrates just how disconnected Bojack has come from reality, and that Gina also is starting to recognize this. So he then gets in his car and speeds away. As he's driving, he takes some more pills, and then immediately we get a shot of a prop car driving on a treadmill. This is to further illustrate how Bojack can no longer tell what's real or fiction. We see Bojack arrive at the headquarters of What Time Is It Right Now, the streaming site that airs Filbert, and confronts the head of sales, who happens to be his longtime friend Todd. Bojack spurts out some nonsense about how clocks have faces and Todd has a face, and how he should have known that his clocky face was behind this. Ironically enough, Todd commonly had sequences where he connects non-existent dots and puts words together that really have nothing to do with each other to arrive at the answer. And he usually arrives at the correct answer, which is what Bojack is doing here, except he doesn't lead him to the correct answer. It just drives him further into his delusion. But Todd, again, sticks to the theme of people being more in their own head and worried about their own concerns, and he confesses to Bojack to selling all sorts of advertising for Filbert to keep the show afloat, including a bunch of cardboard stands of Filbert, Sassy, and Fritz advertising laxatives. But Bojack doesn't really hear that, and instead sees the note that he got saying that someone's going to expose what he did, and so he sees that as proof that it was Todd who sent the note and who was trying to destroy him. But again, this is just a flyer advertising Filbert, but Bojack then quickly shoots off a lot of questions, asking Todd if he was just jealous of him this whole time, if he hated him because Todd was a nothing and that he was successful, a successful cop. And then he asks if he created the TV show just to destroy him. Todd, of course, is very confused and says that that's a lot of questions, but the answer generally is no. Bojack then exclaims that this ends now, and then he reaches for a gun that, of course, he does not have, as he has lost all touch on whether or not he's Filbert or Bojack. But his scrambling knocks over the cardboard stands that creates a domino effect until it activates Todd's sex robot, who charges at Bojack, but while he's covered with the stand of Fritz. And no, I'm not going to cover the sex robot here, as that's not really relevant to this episode. Anyway, Bojack sees this as Fritz attacking him and yells at Fritz to stop while Todd tries to calm him down. Bojack cowers until the sex robot stops. As the sex robot leaves, still wearing the cardboard cutout of Fritz, Bojack exclaims that Fritz is getting away. Todd tries to reach out to stop him, but he and the entire room turn into cardboard and collapse like a set collapsing all around him. And Bojack finds himself on set, but it's not really a set. It's a delusion, and a woman who he recognizes as Gina approaches him, but again, it's not really Gina, as it's a delusion that's all inside of his head. Gina asks him what he's doing with all the running around. Bojack explains that someone is trying to take him down. She then asks if he plans to solve this mystery and then that everything will be fine. And then she tells him that he doesn't want that, for everything to be fine, and calls it so dreadfully boring. Now, this of course is his own subconscious talking to him, letting him know that he doesn't really want things to be fine, that he wants there to be a mystery or challenge to overcome, because everything actually was fine at the start of the episode as he had laid out. He was happy with Gina, and she was happy with the success of the show, and happy that, and he was happy that she was happy. But he described a nagging feeling that something was off about this, and now this is his subconscious telling him what's wrong, is that he doesn't want everything to be fine. She describes it as boring, but I think it's also because he doesn't think he deserves it. As the 4th season episode, Stupid Piece of Shit, describes exactly what he thinks of himself, and that's why he's basically putting it all at risk in the guise of trying to save it. So next, Gina breaks into the musical number Don't Stop Dancing, and there is a lot to unpack here, as I think this musical piece is absolutely brilliant, as it's Kate in metaphor, but also it has like an upbeat, happy exterior, but underneath it has a really dark and twisted tone, which also describes how Bojack feels about his life. The song titled Don't Stop Dancing refers to several scenes earlier in the show critical to Bojack and his life. One was a flashback of Bojack as a kid whose mother was extremely emotionally abusive to him and remained that way for the rest of his life, where she basically made him feel like he was worthless and empty, and the only thing that gave his life meaning was to perform for others. The other scene was a flashback to the 90s when Bojack was doing the show Horsing Around that made him famous, where between takes he told the child actress Sarah Lynn, who was like only around 6 years old at the time, he told her that the only thing that mattered was pleasing the audience and being a good performer, that nothing else mattered. He specifically told her, don't stop dancing. And thus, he was passing on the same trauma that he had experienced as a child to her, instilling a sense in her that being a good performer was the only thing that mattered in life, and without that, you were nothing. Also, the fact that it's Gina who's performing the musical number is a reference to how Gina loved show tunes and always wanted to be in a musical. However, when Bojack pushed her against her will to try to follow her dreams, it turned out that she was a bad singer and she ended up just embarrassing herself, so it just made her feel worse. But of course, this isn't the real Gina. This is an idealized version of her that Bojack created in his head. A damsel to be saved and someone who is a good performer as he feels that that's the only thing that matters is being a good performer. The song starts off with the lyrics, "Life is a never-ending show, my friend, a twisting, turning, ever-bending show." This could refer to Bojack's mentality of being a performer and being liked by audiences as being the only thing that matters. It also refers to how his life has become intertwined with the fictional character Filbert and how he created a TV-style mystery that he's living, meaning his life has literally turned into a show. The lyrics continue. "The audience is everyone you know, my friend. Leave them with a smile when you go." So when Gina sings the first line, Bojack sees Gina standing amongst a lot of people that he knew, people he had wronged. Although it's not really them, it's actors playing them. Now this is done deliberately. This being animation, they don't have to pay actors to appear on screen with no dialogue, so they intentionally didn't want to use the actual images of the characters he knew. This adds to the mentality that life is just a show and everyone is a performer, possibly as a way of letting him off the hook for wronging these people, as if it's all just play acting, who cares. So the people he sees is main characters like Todd, Diane, and Princess Carolyn, characters he has wronged in some way. Princess Carolyn he's wronged for creating a codependent relationship with her that has held her back and affected her life. Todd, he'd wronged by ruining his dream of creating a rock opera because Bojack selfishly didn't want him to leave. Among other things he's done to Todd as well. And Diane, he's done many things as well. Most relevant is trying to ruin her marriage because he had a crush on her. There's also Herb Kazaz, whom he betrayed, which led to him getting fired as showrunner on Horsing Around. And Herb has specifically told Bojack he did not forgive him shortly before he died. His mother, who took advantage of him and was cruel to him, he had wronged her by being cruel to her when she was suffering from Alzheimer's. And then here's his half-sister Hollyhock, whom when she tried to visit him and spend time with him, he spent the whole time trying to get more pills, which nearly got her arrested. Wanda, whom he had dated in season 2, and that relationship ended very badly. And Charlotte, whose misdeeds that he did to her I described earlier in this video. There's also Kelsey Janning, a director he respected and admired, and his careless antics got her fired from a film, and he inadvertently ruined another film that she was trying to make. And then there's Sarah Lynn, the child actress he worked with on Horsing Around, whom he ruined with instilling the mentality of don't stop dancing. She eventually became a pop star, a life that she found incredibly empty and unsatisfying, which would lead to her becoming a self-destructive addict. And when she was on her way to recovery, Bojack's self-pity led them to go on a several-month-long bender that led to her overdosing on heroin that he gave her. And as we would later learn, he waited 19 minutes to call 911, a decision that could have well cost her her life. So next we see Gina take Sarah Lynn's hand, or the actress that's portraying her, and spin her around, and they do a little dance around the planetarium where she died in Bojack's arms. This of course would be a major regret and point of depression in Bojack's life. In fact, in this sequence we see Bojack reaching out to Sarah Lynn as if he wanted to help her, but instead she just spins away from him. The lyrics then continue. You can bet that you're a star, so don't forget how fun you are. And Gina sings this to Bojack as cardboard sets of important places in his life appear around her, including his home in the Hollywood Hills. This is basically the symbol of loneliness for him. His boat escaped from LA that he bought in New Mexico while he stayed with Charlotte. The house from Horsing Around, the show that made him famous. We also see the D from the Hollywood sign that he stole in a grand gesture to try to win Diane away from Mr. Peanut Butters. And the planetarium, which not only is where Sarah Lynn died, but also where Herb told him he was going to make him a star of Horsing Around. So all these symbols hold various levels of grief for him and represent things that he's done or that he regrets. However, some also represent how he's a star, which is what the lyrics are telling him, which again reinforces what he believes as being the only important thing in life. The lyrics continue. So go out there and give it your all, and don't stop dancing until the curtain falls. Gina sings this as she walks backward onto the set of the Dick Cavett Show, a show Bojack watched as a child where his hero Secretariat was interviewed. Another very important moment in his life, as he viewed Secretariat as more of a father figure than his own father, despite the fact that Secretariat committed suicide when his racing career ended in scandal. Which again only reinforces to Bojack that being a star is the only reason worth living. Gina then pulls a lever that causes Bojack to fall down a trap. He lands in a black void, and Gina reappears to continue the song. As she does, cardboard cutouts depicting despicable events of Bojack's past appear beside him, including the moment where Bojack's mother, while suffering from Alzheimer's, believed a doll was actually a baby. So Bojack threw the doll off of the balcony, which traumatized her. And also the moment where Charlotte caught Bojack about to have sex with her 17-year-old daughter. And the moment where he got the hairdresser from Horsing Around fired because Sarah Lynn was caught drinking his alcohol and he told the producers the alcohol belonged to the hairdresser. And the time where he stole the D from the Hollywood sign as a twisted act of love for Diane, who did not love him back. The lyrics continue. You are a rotten little cog, Moon Frere, spun by forces you don't understand. Living is a bitter, nasty slog, Moon Hare. Why not sell your sadness as a brand? Calling him rotten is clearly how he feels about himself. The forces that you don't understand line probably refers to the emotional abuse he suffered from his mother that stunted his growth, and also suffered emotional abuse as a child, which is what led her. Well, she had also suffered abuse as a child, which has led to her passing it on to him. The sell his sadness as a brand refers to him turning his suffering into part of his performance career, such as the biography One Trick Pony. Diane wrote about him that depicted the sadness and despicable things that he's done that also helped revive his career, and also how parts of Filbert, particularly the ones Diane wrote, were about bad things that he has done in his life. We then get images of Bojack posing for photos with Todd's sleazy Filbert advertising, and the lyrics continue. Paint your face, brush your mane, and find some place to cut your pain to portions we can buy at the mall. And don't stop dancing. No, you don't stop dancing until the curtain falls. In images, we see Bojack driving down a highway surrounded by billboards depicted the shameless Filbert advertising, while Gina stands up in his convertible and sings. This part, I think, could refer to how his life has become all about selling himself as a brand in order to deflect from anything important, including the pain he feels. I particularly find the line about cutting his pain to portions that they can buy at the mall interesting. For one, he refused to feel pain, which is why he's addicted to painkillers. And another thing is the similarities between Filbert and how ashamed he is of his own life, which may be the basis of his delusions. That he hates Filbert because he feels it exposes what a terrible person he is, because the character of Filbert is too close to who he is, and he hates being that exposed. We then get a tap dancing number performed by the actress who's portraying his mother Beatrice, and all through, it's very upbeat and catchy like the rest of the song. I find this piece probably the most disturbing aspect of the song, as Beatrice tap dances around Bojack until she walks backward into a coffin, which Gina cheerfully knocks over and stands on top of. This is disturbing symbolism in many ways. For one, Beatrice was known as a beautiful dancer. In fact, that's the only positive thing Bojack remembers about her mother, or about his mother. In fact, she was the one who beat the importance of dancing and performing into him, and that without audience approval, nothing else matters. Of course, her walking backward into a coffin refers to the fact that she recently died, and Bojack was really affected by her death, as it brought out the desire to actually be loved by her, something that he wanted so much. He wanted to interpret her last words as meaning that, when in fact they were probably meant nothing. He was so troubled by his mother's death, however, when his friends tried to comfort him, he put on a front that nothing was wrong and insisted that he didn't want to talk about it, when clearly it was something that really upset him. It also symbolizes that she did in fact keep dancing until the curtain fell. The curtain falling, of course, symbolizes death. I find it disturbing because it's Bojack's abused inner self telling him that he's just got to keep putting on a show until he dies, just like his mother did. The lyrics continue. Today's the day, you got the spark, you'll find the way to make your mark and get your tiny name on that wall. Gina then points Bojack in the direction where he sees his name in giant neon lettering. The lyrics continue. Don't stop dancing, baby, don't stop spinning. Gina then begins to dance on top of Bojack's name in neon lettering, and each letter she steps on causes the neon lights to go out. The lyrics continue. Don't stop belting, baby, now you're winning. We then pan out to see Bojack surrounded by a bunch of popsicle dancers. This, of course, is incorporated what Philip said about popsicle guys and how Bojack integrated that into his delusion that someone's out to get him. The lyrics continue. Grief consumes you, but you just keep grinning. Probably the most important line in the song, as it perfectly explains what's going on with Bojack, as all these delusions are just ways to deal with his grief, which does in fact consume him, and likely a main reason why he became addicted to the pills to hide from his grief. The lyrics continue. The ache becomes you and it's just beginning. Now, this is probably the most ominous part of the song, as it's a part of him that recognizes that things are only going to get worse, that his avoidance of pain and his delusions are going to lead to his life getting worse. The lyrics continue. Don't stop dancing, nothing's certain but the curtain. When she sings that line, the Filbert Balloon appears floating above. When she finishes the line, the balloon suddenly flies straight at him and hits him in the face, and we briefly see blood shoot out of his head from impact as we see the effect of glass shattering. This is extremely ominous, but I'll get more into what I think the balloon means later. However, the line about nothing being certain but the curtain, of course, refers to death being the only certain thing in life. So the balloon crashing into him wakes him up from his dream, and he wakes up abruptly, gasping for breath. He gets out of bed, but then Bojack fades into Filbert, who we see looking over the balcony of his home when Sassy approaches him and tells him that she's made a break in the case, but that he's not going to like it. When he tells her to try him, she says it's about Fritz, then points her gun at him. We then cut to back to Bojack standing at the same position on his balcony at his house when Gina approaches him, pronouncing that she knows why he's been acting strangely, and reveals that she has found all the hiding spots for his pills, which she had gathered up in one plastic bag. The two scenes mirror each other in how where each character stand, the background, and it's both about the Gina / Sassy confronting Bojack / Filbert. Bojack reaches for the pills, telling her that those are his and he needs them, and the scene then blends into Filbert, where Sassy points her gun at him and warns him if he tries that again, he's dead. He insists that he's not the bad guy here, that it's Fritz. But Sassy reveals that she's with Eternal Affairs and that she did some investigating and Fritz never existed. We then get the same shot we got before of Fritz strangling Filbert's wife, but Fritz buzzes out and turns into Filbert, revealing that it was actually Filbert who strangled his own wife. Thus implying that Fritz was just a figment of Filbert's imagination. Sassy then explains that Filbert was the one who killed the chief, the coroner, and all the others because they knew his secrets. Again, these parallels to Bojack, who is alienating everyone he knows that know because they know his secrets. And just like Filbert, the fear of his secrets becoming uncovered is what is motivating him to do these awful things. But Filbert gets the better of Sassy and knocks the gun out of her hand, and a pursuit ensues. This blends into Bojack running after Gina, insisting that she give him his pills back. He catches up to her and grabs her arm, telling her that he needs those pills, but she knocks his arm away. He insists he's trying to protect her and then shows her the ransom note. She's dumbfounded and points out that it's just marketing for the show and flips it around where it's clearly an advertisement for Filbert. She tells him that it's the copy of the note Filbert gets. We then cut back to Filbert where Sassy reveals that he was the one who sent himself the note because of the guilt of what he did was tearing him up inside. Of course, this also parallels to Bojack and how his guilt is consuming him from the inside. In fact, the whole resolution is pretty much the same as Filbert has in Filbert. The killer he had been searching for was actually him, just like in Bojack's life, the person he was trying to find that was trying to ruin the good thing he had was actually himself. Gina asks Bojack why he doesn't remember filming that scene, and he says that he's been distracted. She corrects him that he's been high and he's losing control and his behavior is going to ruin her show. This sets Bojack off, particularly her calling the show hers, and Bojack fixates on that and says that it would be a shame if her boyfriend's debilitating drug problem ruined her show. And there's a bit of an irony in this outrage because in Bojack's delusion he kept telling himself he wanted to save the show for Gina's sake, but now she's refusing to give him his pills, he no longer cares about that. He asks her without the show, where is she going to go sing with her popsicle dancers? This of course confuses her as he's referring to his own delusion. Back in Filbert, Sassy tries to convince him that she knows there's a good man inside of him somewhere. However, he strikes her and tells her that that man is dead. We cut back to Bojack, who is acting equally out of control as he yells at her to give him the pills, and he punches the wall, putting a hole in it. Filbert attacks Sassy and begins to strangle her. We pan out to see Flip and Mr. Peanut Butters watching the filming of the scene where Flip, with satisfaction, notes that it looks real. We cut back to Bojack where he apparently grabbed the pills away from her violently, and she announces that she's leaving and tells Bojack to stay away from her. When he tries to convince her to stay, she yells at him to get help, or don't, as she doesn't really care anymore. Bojack is visibly upset at her leaving, but downs a whole bunch of pills in response. On set, Bojack continues to strangle Gina even after Flip yelled cut. Princess Carolyn tells Bojack that he said cut, but he keeps choking her. Mr. Peanut Butters is suddenly very uncomfortable and notes that he thinks that Bojack is actually strangling her for real. Flip feigns disapproval, but then tells the camera operator to turn the camera back on, showing just how despicable he is. Princess Carolyn asks Gina if she's okay, but in response she just makes choking noises, so Mr. Peanut Butter springs into action and with help from some of the crew pulls Bojack off of her, and she is visibly in pain with choke marks on her neck as Bojack screams and a rage-filled anger. Gina asks him what the fuck is wrong with him as Princess Carolyn takes her to get some help. Now, this part is so tragic and sad. I cry almost every time I see it. Has Bojack... Bojack's a narcissist, and he can be a huge asshole a lot and very inconsiderate, but he does care about people and ultimately does want to do right for them. And in fact, as I said, it was a recurring motif in this episode that he was happy that Gina was happy, and he tried to convince himself that he was doing everything for her. But this was the true blending of both Filbert and Bojack, where the two personalities were interfused, where Bojack did lose his touch on reality and transferred the anger he felt with Gina for exposing his drug problem and leaving him onto Filbert, who was equally as angry with Sassy for exposing him. And it's so sad, especially knowing the long-term trauma that Bojack causes Gina in this moment, which we see in later seasons. Also, in the next episode, it's extremely tragic as Bojack doesn't remember this incident, and Princess Carolyn tries to protect him from this knowledge until he finally pushes her to show him the footage of him choking Gina, and it's so tragic to see Bojack realize what he did. Because in this moment, he was completely overcome by the drugs and the delusion and is not living in reality. Now, that does not absolve him from what he did in any way, and that's part of what makes this so tragic. At the start of this video, I referred to this episode as him hitting rock bottom, and I stand by that because this is not the moment where the worst thing happens to him. Rather, it's the moment where he does the worst thing to someone else and ruins what could have been a really happy life. Bojack then has another delusion where everyone on set disappears and he's alone. But in front of him is the posh staircase that keeps appearing with the bright light spilling out from above. Bojack climbs the staircase, and once he's on top, he finds himself amongst the clouds with wind blowing in his hair as if he were at a high altitude. And then, floating right above him is the giant Filbert Balloon, just hovering right on top of him as he stares at it. Okay, so now let me get into my interpretation of what this balloon represents. It is by no means an original or unique interpretation, so I'm sure many others made the same observation before, but it is how I interpret it. So I believe that the balloon represents his opioid addiction. Throughout most of the episode, we see the balloon lurking in the background as a dark, ominous presence. It usually appears after or before Bojack takes the pills. To me, this clearly indicates that his opioid addiction is the dark presence lurking in the background that could ruin everything. In the opening scene that shows Bojack and Gina, now I'm getting mixed up. The opening scene that shows Bojack and Gina happy together, he says he feels something could ruin it all, and I believe that's clearly his pill addiction, because in the end that is what ruins their happy life together. At the end of the Don't Stop Dancing song, the balloon flies right into him and smacks him in the face, and I believe that symbolizes what his drug addiction is doing to him, as it's ruining his life and starting to take over and basically smacking him in the face. And in this ending sequence, where after he chokes Gina and climbs the staircase to find the balloon just hovering above him, signifies that his drug addiction is all he has left. He has fully embraced it and discarded all of reality. He has, alienated and then physically hurt Gina in order to keep his pills, to keep his addiction. So now it's all he has left. I do like the symbolism of the balloon being untethered, as I believe that's what the pills do, untether him from reality. But that's just how I see it. So that's the showstopper, a powerful yet tragic episode. On the surface, it would appear to be about drug addiction, but I I don't really see it that way. I see it more of a tragic story of Bojack's own inner failings and the flaws that drive him to do horrible things because of his abusive upbringing. How he can't accept that he's worthy of being happy, so when things go right for him, he subconsciously finds a way to ruin it because he doesn't truly believe he's worthy. The drugs are merely the tool he uses to accomplish this. Now, that's not to minimize the danger of drug addiction, specifically opioid addiction, which does in fact chemically change your brain to make you dependent on them. I simply see this episode more as an exploration of Bojack's character flaws more than the danger of drug addiction, and that it's his inherent insecurity and inability to love himself that makes him vulnerable to such addictions. Some of my favorite episodes of Bojack Horseman deal with drug use. This episode, Downer Ending, and That's Too Much Man, and certainly substance abuse is a big part of Bojack's issues. However, as we'll see in the next season, when Bojack goes to rehab and gets clean, his problems don't end there, and he needs to tackle his inner issues to truly improve and become a better and happier person. However, I also love the Showstopper as an episode because the mind-bending nature of the episode. I personally love when a show can put you in the mindset of someone who is losing touch with reality, and I think this episode does an amazing job at it, how it blends seamlessly through the Bojack and the Filbert scenes. Conflating the characters, making it clear these personalities are being conflated in Bojack's head. And so it also addresses the issue of acting and how an actor can become the part that they play or let it influence their personal life, which is a topic I find really fascinating when I dabbled in acting and directing. Of course, in this case, the drugs make these elements blend even more, and combined with Bojack's tendency to sabotage himself, give a perfect blend of someone who's losing touch with reality in order to sabotage themselves. It's an episode caked in metaphor that I feel, quite frankly, is a masterpiece whose like is rarely seen in storytelling. So that's it for my A Perfect Episode number 5. I will be back next month with another installment of my A Perfect Episode series. In the meantime, you can check out my channel for more videos on Bojack Horseman, as well as I cover many other shows on my channel, including all things Star Trek, The Expanse, Star Wars The Clone Wars, and more, so be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.